Apple and Google have banned the social media app called Parler from their store. Parler has marketed itself as a platform that values free speech above all else, so they have attracted many prominent and everyday conservatives, and they now have somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 million users. Amazon has also banned Parler from their web server, meaning Parler can no longer even have their website active. Short of starting from scratch and creating their own independent servers, it seems Parler is down indefinitely. This is a new low that these big tech corporations have reached. Parler was started as a safe haven for free speech, and now the largest corporations on the planet are banning them. The reason given by all three tech companies is that Parler failed to effectively monitor and root out violent threats on their platform, citing the fact that the riot at the Capitol was partially planned on Parler. And there were numerous posts calling for the death of police officers and elected officials. So let's recap the series of events. The storming of the Capitol on January 6th, 2021 was, by definition, an act of insurrection against the U.S. government. The evidence that the election was rigged or stolen is next to none. Trump and his team did their very best to make a case, proving that there was election fraud, and they failed in nearly every lawsuit in every state. If you still want to believe the election was stolen, you have every right to do so. From the outside, it's easy to convince yourself that the evidence is enough to prove foul play in the election, but the Trump team failed to prove that within the legal system. That's the bottom line. That's what matters, and the public opinion does not change the due process of the law. The Democrats and even some Republicans accuse Trump of inciting this insurrection, but these allegations also don't hold up under scrutiny. However, that remains to be seen. Okay, now we have that out of the way, we return to the issue of free speech, or rather the suppression of it. After the attack on the Capitol, Twitter banned the sitting US president for being too inflammatory, claiming that his future tweets would incite further violence. This was definitely a new low in the story of big tech censorship. People may say it's inconsequential. After all, Twitter is a fantasy world. Only 22% of adults in the US are even on Twitter. And the whole format just encourages people to be as provocative and disagreeable as possible. But the impact of a tech monopoly shutting up a sitting US president cannot be overstated. Parler was then forcibly shut down by other big tech monopolies. Parler had very recently surged to number 1 on the Apple Store, and it was conceivably the go-to social media platform for Trump after he was permanently banned from Twitter and indefinitely removed from Facebook as well. I have to wonder if the annihilation of Parler is purely ideologically driven, or if it's more likely that these companies simply want to maintain their monopoly on the spread of information. To kick Parler off of Amazon's servers draws a line in the sand that no company could follow, and it's an indication that there are more forces at work here than the supposed benevolence of our giant tech overlords. If server providers were to hold all companies to the same standard they're setting for Parler, they would all be banned. If Google held all Google Play users to the same standard, no type of communication app would exist. Gmail, WhatsApp, and countless others have all been used to plan illegal activity. No one, from Ron Paul to Donald Trump himself, seems to have any ideas for what should be done about these massive tech companies. Google arguably has more power than the US government, and the rise of tyranny is not limited to politicians. It's a top-down effect that can apply to any entity that has this much power. We have, in a way, dug ourselves into this hole by allowing our lives and the culture to be centered around the internet. The attack by Buffalo Man and his constituents only made things worse for everyone seeking information and the ability to speak freely on the internet. Not to mention those whose lives were lost and their families. Buffalo Bill and the rest of the rioters handed the tech companies all the ammunition they need to blow a hole in the head of free speech. They will feed off of that event for years, citing the insurrection as what can happen when people are allowed to spread what they call conspiracy theories or disinformation. It was bad enough already, and they just made it worse. Good job. So where do we go from here? The argument on the left and the right, it seems, has always been something along the lines of, if you don't like the tech companies, quit whining and start your own. So along came Parler. How did that go? They banned them from the internet, not just social media. Maybe you could build your own servers like Facebook did, albeit after a significant amount of time. But that costs billions, and to get off the ground, you have to start somewhere. And that's what Parler was doing. But the geniuses obsessed with free markets and also those advocating for socialism are saying the same thing on this subject. And they seem to have reached the exact same destination. Start your own tech giant, they say. There comes a time when you have to ask, how long should we sit back and watch as Parlers and Gabs and ThinkSpots are all blacklisted and sabotaged before we decide that these giant companies are out of control? In many ways, they do have more power than the US government because they control the spread of information. The good news is that the answer doesn't have to be more federal regulation. If Parler brought a well-constructed lawsuit against Amazon Web Services using verbiage from the Communication Decency Act passed all the way back in 1996, they might have a shot at backing these companies into a corner. They could make a case that if these companies want to moderate the content posted on their platforms, they must be treated as publishers. If they do not want to be held liable for that content, they cannot regulate their platform or deny services to anyone, or they cease to be a platform and are then a publisher. Under that criteria, any violent threats made on social media would just be handled by law enforcement agencies, the same way they would be in a town square or a public park. People have been talking about this type of lawsuit for years, and it may be time to move forward with it. Parler did bring a lawsuit against Amazon, but so far their case has not focused on the publisher versus platform issue that I was mentioning. Let's take a look at this article published by the Associated Press on the 21st of January. Judge says Amazon won't have to restore Parler web service. U.S. District Judge Barbara Rothstein in Seattle said she wasn't dismissing Parler's substantive underlying claims against Amazon, but said it had fallen short in demonstrating the need for an injunction forcing it back online. Parler said it is still working to revive its platform. Although its website is back, it hasn't restored its app or social network. As you can see, Parler's site is completely unusable and has been that way for some time. They've kept their domain name, but that's about it. Parler argued in its lawsuit that Amazon violated antitrust laws by colluding with Twitter, which also uses some Amazon cloud computing services, to quash the upstart social media app. Judge Rothstein said Parler presented dwindlingly slight evidence of antitrust violations and no evidence that Amazon and Twitter acted together intentionally or even at all in restraint of trade. So far, they've focused mainly on the free market and fair trade side of things. I'm interested to see where this goes and if they do bring up the publisher versus platform issue. That's all I have for today. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.